I'm not missing anything, right?
Well, I guess we're not.
We're getting ready.
Just hit.
We're getting ready, guys.
Okay.
No rush. Oh, aha.
Good morning, everybody. I would like to welcome everybody to the subcommittee of the Ways and Means dealing with the budget. At this time, I'd like to have a roll call for the members.
Mr. Michael Ferranti.
Here.
Mr. Frederick Sinala.
Here.
Ms. Carol Tai.
Lost to this town.
Carol, we are checking your attendance. Can you say that you're here?
She can't hear.
Ms. Carol Tai.
Here.
Okay, at this time also, I'd like to mention that other members of the committee are here. Members Susan Gravelisi, Nancy D'Ambrosio, hopefully Stacy Rizzo, also Dr. Diane Kelly, Dr. Lorenzo Garcia, and our CFO, Matt Cruz, and Mary Regal. Sorry, ma'am. And at this time, I would like to have Matt give us an overall scenario with the budget, what's going on this year. Matt, take it away.
All right, so just two big ideas. I know that our budget is becoming almost a 140-page document, but the numbers are meant to tell a story, and to see the story through the numbers, it's what's most important, both for folks who would be taking this in, but for us as well. So this is the year when Student Opportunity Act money has finally been actualized. So you will see on that first line of our budget that the net school spending requirement, also the revenues coming to the school department, has gone up as of the Senate's version of the budget by over $12 million, or an 11+% increase from last year. So this has been awaited. This is partly a correction to some of the things that we've been wrestling with around the nature of our population and economically disadvantaged students. So this is landing with us. That is giving the school committee some bandwidth that we have not had in previous years to do some things that had been hoped to be implemented into the budget. So that's our big story as we work through the details. The second thing to remember is that we're talking primarily here about the appropriated budget. So these are dollars that will be appropriated to the school department by the city for spending on the instruction, the support, and the running of the schools. There are a number of lines in this budget that refer to grant funding, primarily around personnel who will be staffed and paid for from the grants. So that has a place in this budget. What we don't do here is spend a lot of time on the nitty-gritty of how is the grant funding going to be spent next year. Some of those numbers have been given to us. Some of those get given to us later in the calendar year. And so that work is done through budget amendments, budget work with the Department of Education. So that needs to be informative for the committee, but primarily the decisions and the conversations that's happening now is around the appropriated dollars that we will spend coming to us, meeting that net school spending requirement, and mobilizing those dollars behind the vision that Dr. Kelly and her team has for the district.
I don't want to interrupt. Are you finished?
The only thing I was going to say is we are working in conversation here through a draft of the budget. So this is not a finished project, finished product. We are putting all of our eyes in community on this to understand it better, to see if there's any dissonance in here mathematically. This helps to do that. We've been hustling at that. And at this point, we're presenting to you a draft of the budget that says, hey, we have built a budget that basically brings us to a balance with the appropriation that we'll be getting from the city. So there's still a lot to talk about and understand, but we've gotten to the point of presenting a potential balanced budget to you and can then begin today to dialogue about that.
And just one thing that I want to add is we did give some preliminary information on spending of the ESSER 1, ESSER 2, and ESSER 3 grants. Those are the big bodies of money that Matt's referring to as some of the spending is happening through grants. And we gave you the overview already of how we intend to spread that money out over multiple years, and also pull some of our carry forward into the years that come after the ESSER money goes away, so that we can have a longitudinal look of financial stability. With that piece in mind, when we move further through the process, as you'll see here, there are some, as Matt mentioned, salary positions that we have targeted for payment through those grants. And again, it's a small portion of the grant that we hope to use on salary, because we want, that's not sustainable when that money goes away. But when we get further down this road, after we get through this portion of looking at the appropriated budget, we're going to dig more deeply into the details on ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 and get you that information prior to your voting the school department budget, because we know that's relevant.
Okay, at this point, you know, with the introduction that Matt have, does anybody in my committee, either Cal or Freddie, have any questions for Matt or Dr. Kelly? Can Carol hear us?
Carol, did you have any questions? Can you hear us?
No?
Skilled and non-skilled home care. Gary Aronson, part of the director of communications and customer service.
Okay, Susan, any questions? Anthony, any questions?
I do not have questions. Based on what I see on the screen, I will say, though, that the audio is a bit garbled, but no questions at this point. Thank you all.
Mr. Mayor?
It's quite garbled.
Mr. Mayor there?
Mr. Mayor, did you have any questions?
Okay. Okay, at this point, what I think we should do is, you know, go through the series on the salaries, one series at a time. We'll take, you know, Matt, you can give us an overall of it, then we'll, any questions, we'll go at that point. Yeah, we're on page 3.
Okay, so on page 3, what we do here is we give you a breakout by series of just summary of the different salary accounts, and we present to you any change that has happened from the previous fiscal year. In the detail of the budget, and also on a later page, instead of dollar amounts, we deal in head counts or full-time equivalencies. So both of those will kind of trend with each other. As there are increases in employees in those series, then the amount of money that you're looking at will be in there. So we could just go quickly through series, and I'll just hit some highlights. So in the 1,000 series, the changes that you see here are primarily just bringing us into accord with the Department of Education's fund codes to report our spending properly. So this year we'll have 4 folks classified in the assistant or superintendent lines. And we'll also have Jamie Flynn doing administrative technology. So there's been some in and outs in that department. Down in the 2,000 series would be where the primary increases are coming in the budget, as most of what we've done with the SOA money is increase instructional staff. So you see some of those changes in there. You'll also see $1.25 million line called negotiations. All of our union contracts are in the collective bargaining process right now. Since we don't know what that settlement will be, we just take a guess at that and we encumber those funds in this line so that when we move to increasing pay in accordance with the collective bargaining, there's funding in there to cover that. But in the detail for each individual person, there's been no raises actualized as we're waiting for that work to get done. So the last 2 years, you've seen no dollars for negotiations. This year, you see a very large amount. That's why RTA, RAA, AFSCME, and AFOP are all in process for a new contract. The 3000 series just has a small decrease in it. So basically, we've kept that series in line with what it was last year. Don't forget that whenever you see a transportation number, those dollars are actually being funded by the city. It's the department's responsibility to educate the kids, the city's responsibility to get them to the place of education. Same on the 4000 series, there's been some shifting around of custodial personnel, and a small decrease there just shows a current FTE decrease from the previous year. The 5000 series is our benefits stuff, and so it's a hard year to get your head wrapped around what that could look like in the coming year, so we've kept them pretty static. There's no deficits being incurred in them this year. We wouldn't expect so next year. And then the civic activities is just some partnership we do this with the city to keep a secure base of the Harry Delarusso Stadium. So that is our salary side of the budget, and you can see an 11% overall increase, and that is primarily due to the infusion of new staff with the SOA money that has come to us. Let me pause on the salary side.
Okay, Matt, we'll open it up for some questions. Fred, any questions on this?
On the 1000 series, Matt, other district-wide administration, minus 76%. Are those positions that are going to be filled?
No, that's a difference in categorizing the employees. So in our last budget, Dr. Garcia was playing sort of a hybrid role of doing some assistant superintendency functions and also some administrative technology functions. So he was slotted as other district-wide administration last year in that hybrid role. Now that he's sliding into assistant superintendency and Jamie Flynn is sliding into director of administrative technology, what you're seeing here is the distinction of those two things. So there'll be no addition to the other district-wide administration. It's clear now with job descriptions that we have an assistant superintendent and we have a director of administrative technology.
Okay. Carol, any questions, Carol?
Business, care is obviously of utmost importance to us. Compliance equally is important, and then growth and profit.
Carol, do you have any questions?
No?
Okay, Susan, any questions, Susan?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Ferranti.
Go ahead.
Matt, in the 1000 series, I see that there was a decrease in regular aids by 31% and then an increase in sped aids by 15%. Sure. Is there any reason why we have a decrease like that in regular aids?
Yes, so regular aids is the most catch-all line in the budget. And if you went into the detail, you would see a number of different types of staff that get put into that place. One of that type of miscellaneous person who's not a full-time employee, but in that para kind of world, were our future teachers. So there was 5 of them in the budget last year. I think a number of them have become real teachers, and so I think we're down to just 1 who is still categorized as a future teacher, which is what's affecting the decrease in there. And then the increase in the special education aides. There's some calculus that goes back and forth between how many aides are being covered with appropriated dollars, that's what you're voting, and how many special education aides, paraprofessionals, can be supported with our federal special education Timex grant. So as those kind of interplay, you may see a decrease in our ability to charge aides to the grant, so an increase in what we have to vote. The 177,000 is showing about 15%. That's also one of our most volatile accounts during the year because of the high rate of transition of that staff. So we try to play it safer in the budget. I think if you track the last 10 years, you would see, oh, we didn't spend as much as we had anticipated we would, but it's a safety valve with the nature both of the transition and the need for the aides. You know, we don't know exactly who will be educated next year. We may have a need for 4 or 5 aides that we had not anticipated, so we're trying to project that in the budget to have the funds available.
Thank you. And one more question, which was actually messaged to me by Mrs. Rizzo, who's unable to attend today.
Right.
In the 3000 series, she was inquiring when she was looking through the nursing staff. She saw that we have one more at the Hill, but we had talked about increasing the nursing staff by one more at the PIC and hopefully one other. Is that something that we're going to continue looking at? Yes, and we included in what Matt has provided here today, there is another nursing position through the ESSER grant already allocated there. So yes, those will be in the budget. There are a couple, the part-time person at the PIC and a few of the other positions that were recommended through the Equity Advisory Board, and then some other requested items from schools, such as the Garfield has requested another 5th grade teacher. The high school has requested another math teacher and another technology teacher. These changes are based on enrollments that are now evolving as we go through this process. And those are positions that we will hope to add through the ESSER funding. There was also a request for, I don't know if you're all aware, but the new civics standards came out from the state, and it includes some project-based work, which we're really excited about. And Dr. Porter has been doing a lot of work with the civics teachers to get that underway, and she had a request for a civics coach to help lead that work. So those are pieces that I will be putting in our proposal for our ESSER spending and putting that before you prior to the June meeting. Thank you.
Sir. Matt, I just have a couple of quick questions, okay? Sure. They're minor. On the 2000 series, the sense of principles is up 368,000. But when we got a preliminary number, it was like 354, and I know it's not a lot of money, but is your figure more accurate than the estimate that we got?
Right. One of the things to keep in mind as the budget process goes is we're tying out not just the base pay that someone is getting, but also any longevity steps or degree changes that will be actualized before the next budget. So as payroll staff and I work through those, there'll be little fluctuations all the way up to the point of voting. If people have passed into a new longevity reality, if there's a national board certification that they'll be due next year, we're chipping away at those detailed changes as we go.
And my last question, and you spoke about a little bit, the negotiations. Obviously, I know the number is sort of very fluid, but if the number comes in substantially higher, are we going to be able to budget for that? Where would that additional funds come from? I know we're budgeting $1.2 million. Say it comes in at $1.5 million.
Right, so what we'll do is, once this budget is voted, and then the collective bargaining wraps up, and sometimes that may not happen until several months into the actual school year. Once we see the final signed contracts and what the agreement was, then I'll get together with my payroll manager and we'll get into the detail of this budget and say, hey, we had estimated the 2 or whatever we have done that for in here. Here's the actual across the literal staff that we have. And then that gets broken out by series, and then we'll see if we are chasing any dollars in there. If we are, we'll let the committee know about it. That will simultaneously coincide with us doing our judging of all other accounts as we move through the first quarter of the new fiscal year. So I'd say it like this, assuming that the collective bargaining is settled sometime before September 30th, then in the fall, what you would get from me would be a report that would say, based on this negotiation, here is a surplus and/or a deficit for that. But I'll also be presenting to you a number of those fluctuations based on what we're voting in June and what reality has become by October. So it's a question to hold, and then we'll cover that as we're looking at reality, probably on that first quarter financial report in the fall.
And my last question, the 5,000 series, we increased the retirement buyback incentives. Are we expecting any more people to retire, or are we just putting extra money in there just to be on the safe side?
Yeah, so that used to be much higher, and...
Asking us to lean into the microphones so they can hear.
Oh, sure. I do that? Oh. In previous years, if you track back to older budgets, you would see much higher budgets for retirement incentives. We have been in a season for 2 or 3 successive years now that, based on the demographic of the existing staff, the number of folks who are both retiring is lower. And among that subset of our staff, the number who are due or have earned the retirement incentive based on those parameters has also gone down. So we dropped that all the way down to 50,000 for last year's budget. I think actuals this year, and there's some reasons for a few folks who have chosen to retire, some other layered incentives, it crept up into the 60s. So what we're doing here is just taking a good look at this year's actual, increasing that somewhat, because we don't want to have a situation where we're behind 25 grand on that unnecessarily again. It's very difficult in May, April, to judge what the retirement bubble will feel like a year from now. So we're kind of tracking that on the echo of what we've seen in the present year.
Okay, thank you. I guess going through the budget, the next thing is the appropriated salary accounts for the school committee and the different schools. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. If we have questions on it, we'll be glad to take them. Page 6, obviously, is just the school committee. Page 7 is the superintendents with the assistant superintendents and her staff. Page 8 is just for the copy center person. Diane, who's has that job right now? Page 8.
Currently, that's Michael Hyde.
Okay. Page 9 is the finance office with Matt and his people. Page 10 is the job for the executive director of data and accountability. And is it the director of worldwide languages. Have we hired that person yet, Diane?
We are in process of contracting with somebody.
Okay.
Michael, excuse me, if I
Sure.
may ask on that. He had worn many, many... Yeah. Oh, they can't hear me, we're in trouble. He wore many hats over the last few years. Now, will this be just language, or whoever takes this position will inherit his other duties?
No, we had spoken about this earlier in the year. We did split that into 2 positions because it was way too big, as you mentioned. And so we are in the process of contracting with both. We have elevated, after an interview process, one of our current PIC staff, who's going to become the director of the PIC, or the coordinator of the PIC. And then we are hiring, in the process of finalizing a contract with an EL director. So I'll be hopefully sharing more on that this afternoon.
Okay, page 11, secretaries for the directors. Page 12 is the principals. If anybody has questions, please say so. The assistant principals, obviously we hired 3 more this year than last year. Looks like the Garfield, the Hill, and Susan B. And the Wayland got an additional principals this year. The next page is the secretary and clerical for the schools. The next page is the building technology. The next page is the Beachfront Elementary School with all the teachers. It looks like we're one more personnel, one more teacher than last year. And who are we hiring there, Diane, the additional person, or two?
I believe that's an EL position at the Beachmont.
Okay. The next page is the Garfield Elementary. Looks like we have 4 more people from last year. The next page is the Lincoln Elementary, and we're hiring 2 more, which is always a good sign. The Hill School, we're hiring 5 more from this year to last year. The Paul Revere School, we're hiring 2 more. The Wayland Elementary, we're hiring 3 more. The Rumney Marsh, we're up 6. Garfield Middle, we're up 3. The Susan B. Anthony Middle School, we're up 4. The high school, we're up 6. The Seacoast School, we're even from this year to last year. Instructional support, we've got 6 more. I think, Matt, we might need an explanation on that, page 35.
So these were the positions that we had spoken about earlier in the process, that we added a deeper learning coach, a restorative practices coach, a STEM coach, a mindfulness coach, a math coach, and another consulting teacher position.
Okay.
I should say all of the additional positions are positions that we discussed at earlier budget meetings. And just with Seacoast, you're right, it says 11 to 11 there. It's the same number. But that is actually, we had somebody categorized in 2 different areas in last year's budget, and so that was a correction. But there actually is 1 additional staff member at Seacoast for the upcoming school year.
Okay. Sure, go ahead, Fred.
From the looks of new teachers, we're in excess of 30 to 35. Are there classrooms for these teachers?
I think we're actually at about 45 new teachers. And we will need to, because we have space constraints, in some instances move away from the idea that people have their own classroom. There'll be more traveling. And that will be happening across the board, particularly at the middle and the high school level. At the elementary level, the principals have assured me that they have space for any new positions they have requested.
News to me, but I hope so. Thank you.
We are doing some work to create some classrooms where we need to.
Any other questions? Okay, page 36, miscellaneous payments to teachers, pretty straightforward. The next section is a special ed learning disability. It looks like we're hiring 9 new teachers. Page 41. Looks like we're definitely hiring 1 at the Garfield. I think it looks like 2 at the Hill, 1 at Paul Revere. So that's a good sign that we keep hiring. Next section, page 45, instructional coordinators, same personnel. Really same budget. Substitutes, I think just a quick explanation of the substitutes, Matt.
Sure, what you see here is 3 different types of substitute budgeting that we do. The first is a daily substitute allotment given to each of the school buildings. It's given to them based on enrollment. The second is a bigger chunk of money that is given in anticipation of maternity and other LOAs that may affect specific schools more than others. Obviously, we cannot see that coming, but we put that money aside to give to the schools who would have a higher burden of that during the year. And then the last number that you see is a line for permanent substitutes. These are teachers who are serving, they pass that 40-day mark in the classroom and they become on contract, but can still be moved between schools. So each of those 3 different types of substitute pay gets subsumed under this section. And some of these costs are borne at times from outside money. If someone's sponsoring a professional development that requires substitutes, the ELT grant has some money built in for subs. But this is you basically saying on days when we have the need, we're funding to make the schools run smooth in this way.
Question, Susan, go ahead.
Were you done with your question, Michael? Sorry.
Okay, you can ask.
Oh, I mean, I'm actually backtracking a little bit, and I hate to do that if you are still in the middle of that question. Page 41, when we were talking about the increase of 9 teachers in the SPED department, which is great, I mean, obviously, and is that because we have increased enrollment with that particular population, Dr. Kelly? It's not necessarily due to an increased enrollment. It's about right-sizing the student distribution to teachers. Okay, and then my question continues with, do we have enough speech and OT-PT to cover the amount of SPED students, or has been any conversation about increasing those positions? We do. The special education department advises us on what new positions we need. And we have submitted any requests that they made are included here. Okay, thank you. Okay. I'll say it's another one of those categories that can sometimes be subject to change. If we had a large influx of students over the summer, we might be coming back looking for another position in August or. Okay, great, because those are important positions with the enrollment. Thank you.
Okay. Matt, just a little clarification. If somebody overspends their budget at a particular school, there's always going to be money there so they can always hire the people that they do need. So just so everyone will feel at ease that, oh, yeah, you got a budget for $15,000, well, we're going to spend 18. There's always money there to cover to make sure we have the proper people there.
This is in reference to substitutes?
Yes.
Yes, that middle section there, in your budget, it's called long-term substitutes, but not quite permanent substitutes. In a given year, we're budgeting in a way that if your daily substitute was what was expected, you're fully covered. In the case of, hey, we had, 4 women step into motherhood this year, all in the same elementary school, what we're doing with that middle line is providing so that school does not get punished because of a wave that they could not have anticipated. Yes.
Okay, that's good. Any other questions on substitutes? All right, page 47, non-clerical instructional assistants. It looks like we're down 4 people there from this year to last year.
That's right. This is the section that Susan and I had spoken about, the reduction in future teachers who have become actualized teachers.
If I could speak to that for 1 minute, just to say, we're leaning into our Teacher Fellow Program, which is a partnership we have with Salem State University, where they place prospective teachers into the schools for a 1-year internship. And having that available, we've been able to increase the number of those folks we have on hand, which allows us to decrease the number of future teacher seats. So it's not that we're moving away from our dedication to helping develop teachers. It's just that we're doing it in a different way.
You know, we have 7 positions budgeted for that this year, teacher fellow. Okay. Next section's non-clerical paraprofessionals. It looks like we're increasing 11 from this year to last year. Okay, the next section is the libraries and media center director. That stayed the same. Library aides, that stayed the same. Professional development leadership, obviously those people stayed the same. Next one is the guidance counselors and adjustment counselors. We added 2 people, and it looks like they're both at the high school. Psychological services, we're up 6. Looks like 6 on the social workers. 1 at the Garfield, 1 at the Paul Revere, 1 at the Whalen, 2 at the high school, and 1 at the Susan B. Anthony. Support services, attendance/parent liaisons, were up 9 people from last year, which looks like it's all, most of it's on the family liaisons. The health department, we're up 1 personnel from this year. Obviously, we had a nurse. Transportation services, we're down 1 person from this year to last year. Looks like it's the full part-time drivers from 13 to 12.
I can speak to that. We made the adjustment also with when Mr. Farrell retired. Mr. Novoselsky took over that position, but we did not backfill his. He had been counted as a part-time driver previous to that. So I think that's where the difference is there.
Yeah, plus we added a full-time on, so. Okay. Like I said, anybody has questions, please speak up. Athletics, it looks like it's pretty much the same this year to last year with coaches, directors, trainers.
Yep.
School security, we still have 3 police officers with us. This 52-week security guards, that stayed the same. The 43-week security guards, that stayed the same. Plant and maintenance, obviously, is Kyle. Custodians, as of this budget, we're down 2. Are we going to get, are we adding any more, Diane?
So this was a shift that we had been working on with the ASME unit for a number of years now to reduce the nighttime shift at Revere High School and increase the number of maintenance people. So overall in that unit, it's going to be the same number, but you'll see in a minute when we get further in that we have added 2 maintenance positions.
Okay. Tradesman is the same from this year to last year. Employer retirement contributions, that looks like it's pretty much the same. Matt, do we think the 150 for the unemployment is going to be okay this year?
Yeah, I mean, so we had been tracking under that in pre-COVID times.
Right.
And so there was ample room in there for anything that we had experienced in recent years. We know that this year we'll spend double that, but the majority of those new unemployment costs are being covered through outside grant funding. And so assuming that September stabilizes in a pronounced way, then the 150 should be a solid budget amount for that 10 months of that fiscal year.
Diane, do we anticipate any sick leave buyback this year? Do we anticipate, Matt, any sick leave buyback?
Yeah, so the way that the sick leave buyback functions is, again, there's a criteria in there, but for folks who are retiring and do have a number of sick days that they have not used, there's a calculation that goes in for that. It's not a large amount to any individual person, so the only issue we would have would be if there was a sudden large number of folks deciding to retire at the same time. We're not anticipating that happening in the coming years.
How much is it a day, Matt? Do they get 20?
Yes, $20 unless there's some other specific thing going on.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. The next section is the crossing guards. Looks like we have the same personnel from this year to last year.
Yeah.
Stadium security, same people. Okay, next section, Matt, page 69, negotiations.
Yep, so I spoke with City Hall about the accounting for this. Their preference is that we not vote a multiple number of negotiations lines,
Okay.
but that we show clearly here in the backup across series what our anticipated negotiations costs are with collective bargaining. And then we will infuse into our appropriated budget a single line for negotiations. And what happens is that line itself doesn't get technically expended. It gets expended as raises are realized at the individual account level. What I wanted to do here was just show you clearly so that you could see the breakout. We have 4 unions in process of collective bargaining, so we don't want to miss any of those costs that would be coming. So this is more of just an FYI kind of page for you. You'll just be voting a single large amount.
Any questions, anybody? Nope. Okay. Next section is miscellaneous. Anything different there, Matt, this year than last year?
No, you can see one of the evidences here of the draftness of this budget. As we've been trying to get to a balance, there's been some places that we maybe a month ago thought, oh, we might be able to invest some appropriated dollars in this space. And one of those might, for example, is professional development. And then as we've been balancing the appropriated side, some of those might come down and then be infused into some of the grant funding that's coming. So this is one of the places where you can see the evidence of the in-process nature of the budget. Mostly this is static for the way that we're mobilizing a small amount of miscellaneous money each year behind the work.
Page 71, revolving salary accounts, food service costs. Go ahead, Fred.
On the revolving account, other than the food service, are there any more revolving accounts? Because I thought they phased those out.
Sure, we have.
On the revolving accounts, I thought one time they were phased out with the exception of the cafeteria department.
No, we have fewer, but there's still a number of revolving accounts covered under statute that allow for us to operate based on an income expense basis. So other revolving accounts, for example, would be a rentals account. As we bring money in for renting the schools, we cover costs incurred for that. The Garfield pool remains a revolving account. As we rent it out, we receive money, and then we invest in the goodness of that pool. The athletics department taking gate receipts then funds some of the purchases that we make for our athletic programs. So there's still a number of them. What you're seeing here is just a detailing of if there's anyone's job attached to the revolving world. If there's anyone in the payroll that's in revolving, we want to show that position as being something that you're formally committing to based on the availability of funding in the year.
Thank you.
I did speak with Cheryl Cole yesterday, and she said 32 is her number. So that is her number for full-time staff in the food services program.
Okay, the next section is the pool. We probably talked a little bit about that Wednesday. Diana, are we gonna, in the process of hiring somebody there if Mr. Conley's leaving?
Carl and I are working on that. We had another conversation yesterday. There's some legwork that we need to do, but yes, our hope is to obviously keep the pool open, and what we need to do is work that through with the city.
Okay. All right, next section is rentals billable under Matt. That stayed the same. Early childhood tuition fees, we dropped one teacher. We went from one full-time to none. We still have two part-times.
And that's another example, as Matt talked about, of people moving between our appropriated budget and grant budgets.
Right.
So we haven't actually reduced the number of teachers. We moved an early childhood teacher's salary out of the appropriated budget into a grant that approves the payment of early childhood teachers.
Okay. The next section is the coronavirus relief funding.
And so, as I mentioned earlier, this is the work that we've done so far with ESSER 2 and ESSER 3. Primarily, we're going to be looking at spending ESSER 2 first because it expires, sooner than ESSER 3 does. So with that in mind, these are the positions that we've already determined we will allocate or fund through ESSER 2.
I just have one question on that. On the parent liaisons, we're budgeting $200,000, but on our preliminary sheet, Diane, we said $385,000.
Yes.
Can you just tell me the differences?
Sure. So what you're seeing here is we have budgeted the part-time costs for family liaisons in the support services line that we looked at prior under the PIC department, family liaison department. We are moving those family liaisons to full-time status. And so what we're doing here is the grant is going to cover the difference between part-time and full-time costs for these people for the year. So their names will be voted in the appropriated budget as part-time, and then their actual costs will be split between that department and ESSER 2.
Okay.
And I'll just say that if you add those two sections, it's right about at the 385 that was the overall anticipated cost. You see 200,000 here in the ESSER grant and roughly 200,000 up above.
Okay, next section, Title I, no change there. Teachers, looks like we've added 5 people from this year to last year.
So here's an example. If you look at the first line there, Mr. Ferranti, you'll see there's an early childhood teacher. So that's an example of why you saw the number go down by 1 in our appropriated budget, and now there's a position here in the Title I budget to pay that salary.
Next section is paraprofessionals, that stayed the same. Sped Timex under Richie Gallucci, no changes there. Operational assistants, still a part-timer. Social workers, that stayed the same. Early childhood teachers, that stayed the same. And that next section, the paraprofessionals, we went down 2 in that section. Sped early childhood, that stayed the same, looks like. Okay, Title IV under Danielle, no changes there. Title III, LEP, will be hiring somebody there. Paraprofessionals, look like we added 1 at the Garfield School from this year to last year. Title IIA under Danielle, 2 directors, 2 teachers, no changes there. Okay, and the staffing. We had a total for last year of 1,237 people. This year, we're going to go to 1,366 for an increase of 129. The biggest changes looks like the classroom teachers are up 53, and the paraprofessionals are up 36, and obviously the family liaison brand new at 12, and everything else is shot either way. Then the next page is they have how many people are appropriated and how many people are covered under the grant. 163 people are covered under the grant. Under regular ed, we have 1,090, 255 are covered under the SPED. We have a new proposal of spending on the F-22 that we've spoken about with the SOA money. It doesn't look like there's many changes. Are there any really changes, Diane, from what you gave us to this document?
There haven't been, and what this does now on page 86 is just gives another way of looking at a lot of what we've already looked at in the appropriated budget. But it just kind of gives a different lens on how all of the new positions that we talked about fit together, some of them being funded through the appropriated budget and others through ESSER 2, as I mentioned. So it's just another way of looking at a lot of what we've talked about.
Okay. Page 87, anticipated carry forward allocation is $7 million, broken out to each school.
Yeah, I can just say a word about this.
Sure.
So just, especially for those who are viewing, the language of carry forward it's accounting language. The best way to understand it is just imagine if you felt, hey, I'm going to make $60,000 this year personally, and I'm going to set a budget that's conservative, but I'm going to probably spend most of that to survive. Well, let's say that your electricity bill comes in a little less than you thought, or a vacation was cheaper than you thought, or you didn't have to put new tires on your car. You may only spend $59,000 this year. You don't lose that $1,000. It's yours, and you may want to mobilize it in the next year of your life. So take that basic way of doing personal finance and apply it to our world as a department. We'll have in excess of $140 to $150 million that we're trying to plan to spend very well. That's part of what today is. We'll do most of that. We will not be budgeting recklessly on anything, and so at the end of the year, there's always going to be some funds that didn't get spent for one reason or another. And those funds, in the subsequent fiscal year, the committee makes a decision to say, what was available to us from the previous year, how are we going to mobilize that for the strength of education in the district? So that's the background on how that works. What you're saying at this point in the budget is, hey, the best that my CFO can tell me in May of 2021 that we will have available in October, November of 2021 is the $7 million that will flow through from that 140 or 50 or so that we're spending. Here's what we're intending to do with it. We're intending to use at least that amount of funding to boost up our educational instructional staff. So that's how this committee has traditionally used funds that have been unspent and flowed through to the next year. We need to spend them in the subsequent year, and you're just saying in this budget, here's how we intend to do that.
Okay. Okay, next section is the non-salary accounts. The 1,000 series, we have about a $100,000 increase. Matt, you want to go through them for us?
Sure. So just like we had done on the salary, we summarize for you here the big picture, and then we can get into the detail in a second. So there is some increased spending in administration. We'll be able to see it in the detail. We have all of our instructional spending in that next section down there. And there's been some increases given to schools who had not been utilizing the Generations tutoring program. So we're building equity into the allocation there to get everyone settled at the same place. You'll see that in the detail. The 3,000 series is costs that we have for support services, whether that be services or supplies and materials or other costs. And the transportation figure, again, is based on contractual obligations that exist and the funding that flows through from the city. Same with the maintenance, and then stretching all the way down to the tuitions. What we basically do each year is we look at the actual costs of special education tuitions and then just try to set a good solid figure that we're comfortable with to increase the number as a whole committed to that. Some years you have voted 5%, some years you have voted 10%. I've done this long enough to remember a year where there was a spike in students being tuitioned out, and I think we may have had an 18% increase in that line. So what we're saying to you is based on actuals from this year, an 8% increase to the tuitions line should be sufficient for next year. So that's the big picture on the non-salary. I think as you walk through the detail, we can get into any other questions.
At this time, Fred, do you have any questions with that? No? Carol, any questions?
Ms. Ty, do you have any questions at this point?
I'm all set, thank you.
This just makes it, makes it easier.
Mr. D'Ambrosio, do you have any questions at this point?
Onboarding process will take less.
I'm all set as well.
For the caregivers, we think is.
Susan? All right, Matt, I just have two quick questions. On the first page, where the special ed program's down 175,000, and the classroom technology is up 180,000, just a quick explanation of those, please. 88. We're on page 88 at the bottom.
So I can explain the special education change.
Good.
This year, as you all know, you approved when we were first working on the budget for us to restructure how we do our testing program and hire several school psychologists. So what that's going to enable us to do is reduce the amount of money that we had funded last year. We had a $300,000 line item for outside testing for students. That number we reduced by about half, or by about $175,000, because now we are going to have staff who can actually do that testing in-house.
Okay.
We'll see the detail on the classroom technology if we want to in a minute, but that's a doubling of the budget for Jonathan of Chromebooks for the coming year.
Okay, on page 90, 1,000 series administrative, only changes the reimbursable cost is 6,000. Page 91, contracted services, there's an increase of 15,000. The biggest one was the content management system services.
Yes, we're hiring a vendor called, not School Point, called EdLeo to build a new district-wide content management system and out-facing website.
Okay. Material supplies are the same. Other costs, the miscellaneous minus 10,000. You know that's a pet peeve of mine, miscellaneous. What are we taking out of there?
Yes, so there's an example of your CFO tracking expenses over time and, at some point realizing, hey, we really don't use $20,000 of superintendent's other costs on miscellaneous stuff. We're much tighter on the budget here, so we were able to cut that in half this year.
On page 92, other district-wide administration, contracted services, no change.
Yeah.
Supplies and materials, no change. Other costs, no change. Page 93, business and finance, service and supplies, no change. Other costs, no change. Legal services for school committee, a substantial increase from last year to this year. It went from 85 to 185,000. Part of it collective bargain, part of it the litigation. Just a quick explanation, Matt.
Yeah. So, one of the things that Matt does very well every year is look at the trends in accounts and re-estimate how much we're spending in different areas. And the example of the miscellaneous going from 20,000 to 10,000 is a perfect example of that. I know that his audit of our legal service fees over the last year has shown a steep increase. And so we are right-sizing this budget in anticipation of a continuation of processes in the coming year.
Okay. Any questions? Okay, next is district-wide information management technology. It's only a $2,000 decrease. All right, 2,000 series instructional.
Yeah.
Going by each school, the Beachfront's the same. Garfield's the same. the Lincoln added 20,000 instructional services. Quick explanation, the 20,000.
Do you want me to hit that? Okay. So you may recall that several of our elementary schools had partnered with Generations, Inc., where they sent, they actually then changed their name. They're now doing Intergenerational. I forget exactly what their new name is. But the schools that partnered with Generations had that service on hand, and the schools that didn't. And so what we wanted to do was kind of equalize the budgeting for each of the elementary schools and give all of them that $20,000 for instructional support. And it might be that a school or two decides to partner with Generations again, or it might be that a school finds another organization that they want to partner with, and that's why it has the more generic name of instructional services. But we see this as another way that schools can identify the needs of their students and help have funding available to find that help and engage that help for the students. So previously, that line item only existed for the schools that had Generations, and now each school has a $20,000 line item for that work.
Okay. The Hill Schools budget, no change. Paul Revere, you just heard the explanation of instructional services, so they're up 20,000. The Wayland, no change.
Can I just interrupt for 1 second?
Sure.
If you're observing and saying, hey, why aren't you giving these school buildings additional funding for services and supplies, don't forget there has been a substantial infusion of funding for technology, supplies, materials, services, other costs through grant funding. And so that's not appearing here. Right. What you're seeing here is just an appropriated thing to say, hey, we want to do what we need to make sure that your buildings are functioning year to year. The difference in bottom line amounts you're seeing is based on the different sizes of the schools, but there's no level budgeting of this in that sense. There's other sources that we are infusing substantial monies into those worlds for these schools.
Okay. Page 96, the middle schools, Romney's got a $20,000 increase. The Garfield has the same increase. Susan B. Anthony, same increase. We've already explained that. Okay, non-salary, the high school, they've got about a $12,000 increase from last year. Part of it's the instructional services increase of $45,000. Then a couple of decreases. Matt, just a quick explanation on that. Page 97.
What we're doing year to year here is following the lead of the building principal on what they're seeing as the best use of those fundings. So in the previous year, there were a few programs that have been phased out. We're not taking that money away from them. We're moving it into a more general line and saying, hey, use it for what would be best for you next year. So you see there's a small increase at the high school, but generally it's giving them the freedom to say, here's where we would like to invest that money in our school.
And I'll just add that the amount of money that we've allocated for other instructional services at the high school is significantly larger than the other schools because the high school is significantly larger than the other schools.
Okay. Page 98, non-salary detail, English language learners, no change. The fine arts, no change. Humanities, no change. Science, no change. Mathematics, no change. $8,000 budgeted for each one of them. Page 99, district-wide instructional non-salary. Contracted services up $95,000. Matt, we need an explanation on the miscellaneous for $55,000.
Diane, do you want to talk first about the doubling of the Gateway Schools partnership around professional development?
Sure. So that's the 5-district partnership, and we have increased the budget to allocate for the professional development day that we will have in November. That's funding that sometimes we had paid through grants in the past, but we're allocating for it here in this budget.
And the conversation around miscellaneous for this is every year there's opportunities that emerge and/or specific needs that emerge around instructional services that may benefit either a specific population, a specific age group, or a specific school. So by creating a miscellaneous line in here, it's giving Diane, Danielle, our superintendents, the freedom to move on something that would be best for those schools and those students without being tied down to, we'll have to wait till the next year to do that.
Right. And I'll give you an example of that, Michael. You'll see that there's an allocation here of $42,500 for North Shore Community College. And that's for our students who actually attend school there, and we have a partnership program with them. In the past, we've run into issues where we have typically about 5 kids a year who do that. And there was one year where we had a 6th student who was a perfect fit, but we didn't have the money budgeted. If that were to happen this year, then we have the funding in miscellaneous to allow that 6th student into that program and be able to fund it. But those are things that we can't always predict everything in advance, and so we need to have a little bit of funding. And it's always modest amounts. We don't put a lot of money into miscellaneous, but it gives us that little bit of flexibility that if an opportunity presents itself, we can take advantage of it.
Okay. The next section, supplies and materials. There was a $90,000 allocation last year. This year, all got wiped out. Quick explanation for that, please.
This is a perfect example of we are going to mobilize that ESSER 2 funding in a way that enables those costs to be put into other places in this budget by using it for those instructional purposes.
Okay. Page 100, non-salary detail. Contracted services is up $10,000. We eliminated the Bay State Reading Institute, and we added another $30,000 in miscellaneous.
Same, right.
Materials and supplies, same amount, $12,000. Page 101, guidance. This expenses went up about $20,000. Quick explanation, non-salary.
Sure, both for this one and the next line. This is also just based on previous years' actual trends over the last 3 years, that the guidance department, some of the costs for what they do and some of the number of students who are taking advantage of those services required an increase. And then the assistive technology under special education, that's kind of a catch-all account for any either products for instruction or to operate the SPED department would be needed. But for multiple years, we've not crept over that $50,000 mark, so we're adjusting that going into next year.
Okay.
And I can just add for the guidance increase, that's related to the unavailability of cost differentials for AP testing that were eliminated in the state budgets a couple of years ago. We're still making sure that we have the money on hand so that all of our students are able to access the AP exams without a financial constraint.
Well spent then. 504 services, $1.4 million is allocated this year to last year, no change. Psychological evaluations down $150,000. Quick explanation, please.
Sure. This is related to the piece that I spoke about earlier where you saw the increase up above in special education. We're reducing here because we have now have on staff school psychologists who can complete the testing. We don't have to contract out for psychological evaluations to the extent that we used to. We still anticipate there may be need for some, but as we, bring folks on board and understand better what the line item is, this will get refined again in the years coming forward.
Okay. Classroom instructional technology, Chromebooks up $180,000. Lab replacement 0.
So naturally, as we moved to a one-to-one program across the district, we've got a much larger number of Chromebooks that are out in students' hands, which is a wonderful thing. But we also need to anticipate that we're going to have additional costs in making sure that we have functioning Chromebooks for every student. The other piece that we're going to be working on with Jonathan is around moving away from a static desktop situation for teachers and moving toward more laptops so that the teachers have the mobility of bringing their machines to and from school with them.
Diane, is the Chromebooks, could either one of them be covered under the grants at all? ESSER 2 or ESSER 3?
Yes,
Oh,
we'll have allocations there as well.
Okay. Page 102, 3000 series, comprehensive health, no change, $50,000 budget. Athletics, $190,000 budget, no change. School security, $30,000 budget, no change. Page 103, transportation inside, an increase of $102,000. The contract went up $92,000. Matt, just a quick explanation on the contract, please.
Sure, to get a sense for this whole page, so we're taking all of our outside costs for running the transportation department. The regular education contract will be moving into its third year next year, so we know exactly what the costs will be there. That's why you see a 5.6% increase on that line. And then down under the outside spread, similar to the special education I was referring to before, we're guesstimating around an 8% increase will be needed for that line. Don't forget that these, well, the whole thing's a budget, but these especially, if we have less students going outside, but there's an opportunity to purchase a vehicle, then we can slide funds around within this series for those purposes.
My question on, the other cost went down $26,500. What would other costs be?
So that would be for repairs to vehicles. It would be for leases. It would be for things like the cost of the fast lane tolls or the gas for the vehicles.
Okay.
And because of a lower lease cost, we've reduced that.
Okay. Yes, go ahead, Fred.
Under homeless contracted services, how are we doing with the contracted services for the homeless? How are we doing with the collection from either the host communities or however that works out?
Yep, so there's multiple moving parts on our homeless transportation. One is often we will split that cost. Excuse me. We'll split that cost with the district that either they moved in from or that they ended up landing into. That can go either way. Sometimes we pay the full cost and then we act like an accounts receivable agent to receive the funding back for it. Often you'll see a purchase order of ours for 50% of a run for a homeless student. That's us sending the funds to the district that's paying the vendor directly. Also, don't forget that the state has mechanisms with which to reimburse districts for homeless education spikes in transportation costs. So they'll do some math on that. They'll send us a payment or reimbursement for that. It'll get deposited into the transportation account in that way. So if you dug into the weeds of the homeless transportation, we're just taking our best guess. And then we're aggressively managing that over the year, knowing also that there'll be reimbursement coming from the state to some level depending on their funding on their end.
All set? Okay. Page 104, food services, the budget's the same, $80,340, no change.
Yeah.
The 4,000 series, operational plant and maintenance, the budget went up $76,000. Those are all the cleaning contracts. What year are we in the contracts, Matt, with them?
So what we're doing now is we are contracting on an annual basis for our cleaning services using a state contract mechanism. So that's why right now you just see a 5% guess at these costs. We're in the process of obtaining quotes from 3 approved vendors, and we'll go with the best case for the district. That will get settled sometime in June, and we'll know going into July.
Michael?
Go ahead, Fred.
On the contracting of cleaning the buildings, are we dealing with one contractor? We used to go with the lowest bidder, and you got stuck a couple of times.
That's right. One of the reasons that we're using the state bid list is because it allows for collecting bids from approved vendors for the entire district. They're not giving us a budget for individual schools. that we are then splitting up between multiple vendors. On the ground, the idea of having 5 different vendors servicing 8 different school buildings is folly. To manage the contact, to manage the schedules, the timings, the problems. So it's a win for the district to use state contract approved vendors, and then to get the best vendor who has the capacity to come in and do a good job top to bottom. Then we're dealing with a single point of contact and competence for managing the process with the vendor.
That's nice to hear, thank you.
Matt, I just have 2 questions. Do these contracts for the cleaning have to be done by July 1st?
Yes, the 12-year cycle, the 12-month cycle for the cleaning contracts begin in the month of July. That's why in the month of April, we'll begin to strategize. In the month of May, we're doing it right now, we'll collect the bids. In the month of June, we'll award it, and we'll be ready in the new fiscal year to have a vendor for those 12 months.
Will any of the money still be covered, the cleaning under the COVID funding? Or is that gone as of July 1st?
Yeah, I don't think there's any intention to mobilize or need to mobilize ESSER funding for that. We're not even, we'll always solicit a cost for additional hours beyond the routine cleaning, but there's nothing in this year's contract for school-wide blasts or things associated for COVID cleaning.
Okay, on page 106, utilities for each of the schools, the modest increases. I would assume that we got hit a little higher this year than last year, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, over the last 3 years, we've corrected several of these counts downward, and so I think we've made those correctives. So what we're seeing now is just simple budgeting practice that we're going to put a 5% increase across the board, and if for some reason electricity or natural gas costs spike, we'll deal with that, but it should be sufficient to cover us for the coming year, and not anticipating major usage changes.
Each school, Beachfront's up 13, Garfield's up 24, Lincoln's up 7,800, Hill's up 10,4, Par Revere's up 7,000, Rumney's up 13,000, the Wayland Susan B's up 20,000, the high school's up 37,000. On page 108, operational plant maintenance, the same budget from this year to last year.
Michael?
Go ahead, Fred.
On the contracted services, give me an idea of what would a contracted service be? We have our own tradespeople. I'm just curious as to if we have our own maintenance people, why we're contracting services out.
Most of this would be for repairs that are beyond the ability for a couple of guys as solid and awesome as they are to tackle. So much of this works through our Amoresco is the vendor who has the overarching ongoing maintenance.
Yeah, but Amoresco comes under 4230, so they're already being included elsewhere.
Yep. What you're seeing is 2 different headings. So you see the 4220 says maintenance of the buildings, and then 4230 is equipment. It's depending on the nature of the project. So if they're fixing something that would be considered equipment, then that falls under that section. If there's a maintenance project being done on a facility itself, then we're going to pay for it from a different fund code. The Department of Education sees the structure itself as different than, say, a piece of equipment that's mounted on the roof of the structure. So it won't exclusively be Amoresco. Carl may say, okay, maintaining the building here, my guys can help supervise it, but there's some special either volume or skills required to do this project. That's why we put some money in there for that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right, we've just discussed the 4220. 4225 is an increase of $5,000, which is the maintenance and monitoring agreement of security cameras. 4230, maintenance of equipment, an increase of $1,300. The monitoring service, it's part of the 10-year maintenance agreement. Page 109, contracted services, the budget's the same, $408,000. Supplies and materials, the same budget, $231,000. Other costs got decreased for $10,000. Training and IT department, other miscellaneous costs. Matt, quick explanation, please.
Just the same. The basic funding training has run between 8 and 10,000 for several years, so we'll set it there. If there's an increased need, then we'll consult with Jonathan on that.
Okay. 5,000 series, employee benefits and insurance, workman's comp's the same, 300,000. Workman's comp medical is the same, 175,000. No changes.
Yep, those are both come under the same fund code in the DESE's eyes, so you really want to see it as a single total number. We break it out based on our estimate. We have not had a year where both ongoing payroll for people who had to go on workers' comp and medical costs have simultaneously spiked. So we may have a situation where, okay, this year the payroll's down, the medical costs are up, we can slide between the budgets.
Okay. Page 111, 7,000 series, building improvements, Amoresco, EMS installments up 10,000. Capital improvements, city-owned buildings, the same, 100,000.
Just one note on the installment. So I would expect next year that you'll see a substantially lower number. The CFO up on city side has been doing some refinancing of some of these long-term bonds. So the amortization schedule that we've been using for a while, I think, may change. So if we're here next year and you see that's down to $400,000 or $500,000, it may be because of a changing in the way that they're leveraging that out.
That would be nice. On page 112, 9,000 series, programs with other schools. Tuitions to mass schools is up 400,000. Tuition on public schools is up 350,000. Tuition to collaboratives is up 280,000, which is a total increase of approximately $1,004,000.
Yes, we spoke here about this before, so we're just giving ourselves an 8% conservative cushion for increased costs in this very volatile world. The only pause that I would imagine the committee would have here would be to say, hey, that $4.3 million, that's a lot of dollars. How sure are we that circuit breaker will provide that for us? So all we can do is go based on the budgets that we've seen so far and the past history of it. And this year, I think I'll be depositing $3.9 million into the circuit breaker account. So we're expecting that to grow along with those costs.
Okay, that ends the budget right now. What I would like to do is ask everybody if they have any questions at all for the superintendent or Matt. Fred, any questions? Yes, Carol.
Ms. Tai, any questions?
No, I would like to thank Matt Cruz for doing his usual excellent yeomanly job with great explanation. And to you, Mr. Ferranti, the chair of this committee, for your leadership.
Thank you.
In going over it so carefully. Thank you.
Thank you. That's me too.
Mr. D'Ambrosio, any questions?
I have no questions at this point, but similarly to Ms. Tai, I'd like to thank Mr. Cruz and Mr. Ferranti for all of the work that they've put into this. Very straightforward and logical, so thank you both.
Thank you. Susan? Is Mr. Mann still with us? Oh, okay. At this time, unless there's any other question, I'd like to close the meeting. Robin, at 10:35. Now, are we scheduled for another one, or any other changes, Matt? Or
I don't think we'll need. So what'll happen now is I'll go do the due diligence on moving from this draft of the budget to a final budget for you to be voting. You'll see some additional pages in that final budget, some of which will include more detailed information on the ESSER grants.
okay.
We didn't want to confuse this meeting with that because it's outside of appropriation. So what'll happen is you'll get a draft, a final draft or final version of the budget to vote at the June meeting, and that budget will include all of this. There'll be some tweaks. We'll deal with the $13,000 that's available there and find a home for it. But don't be surprised if that final budget that you're voting is not 112 pages could be 120 or 130 as we add grant detail in there.
Go easy on my printer. Matt, when do you anticipate that happening, to get the final? I'm using with anticipation.
So what's the date, do we have the date of the school committee vote?
15th?
The 15th, yeah.
Yeah, the 15th is the vote. We'll try to get it to you a week in advance of that. We are like working 20 hours a day and not getting, finished. So we're doing the best we can.
The appropriated side to tweak up and present is one thing. We would like to get you as much, we'll say it like this, we'd like to get as much as we can in this budget, if anyone, about some of the substantial grant funding that's coming in.
I would really like to have like a quick meeting before we vote on it, just to make sure that everybody understands what we're doing.
Sure.
So if we could get it like maybe 10 days, we can have like a quick meeting on it, just to clarify if there's any questions at all.
Right, and some of the grant stuff is, even if Danielle or Diane didn't sleep and work 24 hours, there's some handcuffs on that of what they're able to actually get approved at the state level. So what we'll do is we'll keep chipping away at it.
Yeah.
The heart of what you need to do, your responsibility, is to move on the appropriated dollars. We're just saying we would like to give as much of a sense of there's this other reality that will affect the funding into the budget, but we'll do what we can on that.
Yeah, okay.
And I'll just add that we do not anticipate any major changes to this budget.
No.
Okay. I will need a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.